White Horse, Yukon, and I grew up in Lillooet, British Columbia. I teach at Algoma University in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. In 2019, I was awarded a Canada Research Chair, which was really quite amazing, given that at the time I was one of the very few people arguing that we had been here longer than 12,000 years, but I guess I had enough evidence that the people that agitate those grants believed me, and Creator. I have to say Creator's had a hand in my career. So, this is my book that came out in 2021, The Indigenous Paleolithic of the Western Hemisphere. Normally, academic books, University of Nebraska Press, academic books usually don't sell more than a few hundred copies. I think it's gone over 10,000 in 2 years. And so a lot of people paid attention, and a lot of archaeologists are now using this as a textbook in their class. So in my research, I created a database of hundreds of archaeological sites that predate 11 to 12,000 years before present. The existence of hundreds of ancestral sites dating to the Pleistocene creates a dialogue from which Indigenous people can challenge erasures of their histories and links to the land. It foregrounds their Indigenous identities and empowers them in seeking justice. My research is carried out as ceremony. Research framed in Indigenous method and theory based on respect, relationality, and reciprocity is a praxis that weaves through institutional and public spaces to create social change. So we need to create social change in some very important spaces, number one being academia. So my place in being a part of this ceremony of research and in telling this story was told to me within a discussion I had with a Salish elder, Leonard Sampson, in 1988. I was about to leave Lillooet, a newly divorced single mother with a grade 8 education, 3 children, a truck, and about 26 cents. I went to see Leonard to get his counsel, and Leonard told me that the elders had watched me grow up, and they knew that I had a job to do that would help Indian people. Not just our people, but he said Indian people everywhere. He said what I was going through at the time, which was difficult, was a lesson to learn to deal with difficult situations. Because what the elders knew I would do in the future was going to be a lot harder than what I was going through at the time. In sharing details of who I am, I claim my ancestry, I acknowledge my ancestors, and declare my position as a researcher and an author. I intentionally locate myself as an Indigenous person first and a researcher second. This presents the ways of being, knowing, and doing that my research is based in. So Indigenous peoples' early histories on Turtle Island have been denied by archaeologists for over a century. This has cleaved First Peoples' links to their homelands and created them as recent immigrants to the Americas. Yet in many oral traditions, Indigenous people say that they have been here since time immemorial. Links to ancestors, lands, identities, and history are essential to all people, to their health and well-being. For people who have survived attempted genocide, forced assimilation, it is vital to their health and well-being to reclaim their histories and links to the land. Reclaiming history is a path of revivance and healing. It is a detour off a colonial road to extinction and a journey to a future of growth and renewal. So archaeologists have often discussed Indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere as Asians from Asia. But I'd like to remind archaeologists that Asia did not exist 12,000 or 24,000 years ago. Neither did Asian as a distinct cultural identifier. The first people and their descendants are indigenous to the continents of the Western Hemisphere and have been so for thousands of years. Turtle Island is where their cultures, identities, and lifeways are born. This is where they are from. So please feel free whenever you hear any scientist or researcher saying that indigenous people are Asians from Asia. Please feel free to tell them they're absolutely incorrect. We are indigenous to these continents. Archaeologists have also discussed indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere as the Clovis people. And they claim the Clovis people were the first, arriving here around 11 to 12,000 years ago. But the Clovis people were not a people. They were not a cultural group. They were a Western fictional creation of a cultural group, a fictional cultural group. There has never ever been a pan-hemispheric cultural group known anywhere in the world. Yet archaeologists claim everywhere that Clovis stone tools were found, that's where the Clovis people lived. There was no such thing as the Clovis people. One stone tool is not a culture. Culture is songs, it's dance, it's religion, it's food, it's housing, it's everything, not just one stone tool. But that was archaeologists' way of erasing the diversity of indigenous peoples of the Americas. So really the only place that the so-called Clovis people ever lived was in the wildest imagination of the archaeological mind. So you have archaeologists who will burn you at the stake if your research is not based on absolute scientific data. But they make all this conjecture and claims that it's based on absolutely no data and no science. And they get real angry at me when I point that out. So anyways, what I have found from my research is that there are hundreds of pre-Clovis or pre-11 to 12,000 year before present archaeological sites in both North and South America, and evidence of mammalian migrations between the Western and Eastern hemispheres across millions of years. There are many forms of supporting evidence in every area of research. When we are seeking answers to questions, it's important to consider all forms of evidence and to weave a story based on a holistic view and practice. The existence of stories on the land and sites older than 12,000 years ago and our ancestral connections between ancient and contemporary indigenous communities are empowering to indigenous people. The existence of hundreds of ancestral sites in the Pleistocene creates a dialogue from which indigenous people can challenge erasures of their histories. It foregrounds their indigenous identities and their links to the land, and once again it empowers them in seeking justice. So what archaeologists continue to do to this day is to claim that a lot of times contemporary indigenous people are not linked or descendants of first people. There's absolutely no data for that, and that's not a precedent set in archaeology anywhere else in the world, just here. And that's so that archaeologists can claim ownership of our ancestors, our sites, our history, our heritage, our lands. So these are a couple of maps from my book. And when I wrote this book, it took 13 years to do the research. Anyone who, archaeologists, there have been a number of archaeologists that have supported our being here longer, but whenever they published their research on their sites, they were ostracized by the archaeological community. Some of them were fired, they were called insane, they were called bad archaeologists. They were really, they were so badly attacked for over 100 years that this area of archaeology, we call it pre-Clovis, was said to be an area of academic suicide. If you want your career to die, go ahead and publish on something older than Clovis. That is not science. That is racism and bias. And they don't like it when I talk about that, I know what I do. So I have 139 sites in North America on this map, and I think 58 in South America. I was very careful to only include the sites with the strongest records. So anybody publishing on an earlier site, they're going to do more dating, they're going to be be very careful. They're going to have a lot more witnesses because they know they're going to be attacked. So all of these sites have everything. They have the tools, they have the stratigraphy, they have the dating, and people know that they're going to be challenged, so they're very careful. I have a special coming out in Canadian Geographic in November that will show almost 600 sites. So since my book has come out, it wasn't critiqued, it wasn't attacked by archaeologists. They don't want to look bad for attacking the Indigenous person. And there's been actually some very good reviews because it's all based on strong science. So there'll be over almost 600 sites in the special in Canadian Geographic. It comes out in November. So this is North America. Around 21,000 to 12,000 years ago, the ice was miles and miles deep. It was a huge thick glacier. It went for thousands of miles between the eastern and the western hemisphere. This is apparently, according to archaeologists, when we first migrated here. Nothing is migrating across thousands of miles of glacier where there's no food, there's no fresh water, there's no prey, there's nothing. Right now, all of the tenets of this Clovis first late migration hypothesis have now been disproven by some very great scientists working in paleo-environmental sciences. This is North America 2 million years ago. Most of North America is a subtropical forest. There is a land connection between the eastern and western hemisphere, the area we know today as Northern Asia and Siberia, and the area we know today as Northern North America. So at many points across time, at least I think 12 times over the last 2 million years, there was a very viable migration route. And we know there's strong evidence from paleontologists. So paleontologists have spent decades documenting the migrations of different species of mammals. And we know if mammals are coming and going across here, then it's possible humans were. So there's many times over the last 2 million years when we have viable migration land routes, and that's only one possible land route. This is Pleistocene sites around the world and in Asia. So earliest humans walked out of Africa, we know at least, over 2.4 million years ago. They walked 14,000 kilometers and were settling areas of northern Asia. So we're supposed to believe that early humans and hominids are so capable they got to northern Asia 2.4 million years ago, but I guess there was a toll bridge and they didn't have a loop here to me, so they couldn't cross into the Americas. Like, how can you walk 14,000 kilometers following mammal migrations, living on the land, adapting, and then stop? The land bridge was 47 miles across. One of the oldest sites in northern Asia is about maybe 1,800 miles from the land bridge. Not that far when you've already walked 14,000. So we have solid evidence of early humans over 2 million years ago being everywhere in the world, except according to American archaeologists in South America. So what do you see in this picture that looks anything at all possibly Canadian? What kind of birds are those? Geese? Yeah, those are Canadian geese. That's because this is Ellesmere Island 3.5 million years ago. So camelid first arose in the Americas. To get to Asia, Egypt, everywhere else they went, they had to cross a land bridge. It had to be viable. It had to be clear of ice for long enough to have had a good grazing field for these animals to migrate that far. This is another one of our four-legged relations that made that journey. So this is the dawn horse. Horses arose first in the Americas. And we know that thanks to our good friends paleontologists. So for horses, four-footed animals, they also needed, like the camels, a really good migration route with a lot of food and a lot of water and a lot of grazing areas. Because they made it all over the world. Another one of our four-legged relations is the saber-toothed cat. The oldest basal fossil species of saber-toothed cat is known from Florida 5 million years ago. Saber-tooth was probably following horses and camelids across that lake bridge, right? Like to eat them. So it was a number of species we know that rose in North or South America and traveled to the rest of the world. They needed migration routes, and they had them across millions of years. So another field of great evidence for if a four-legged can walk thousands of miles across an area, a two-legged can. So this is one site in West Virginia called the Cactus Hill site, and the Napa boys were a husband and wife team. They found tools at this site and dated these tools to 14,000 years before present. So they had committed the great archaeological sin. They published this knowledge, right? This is Clovis. The oldest dates for Clovis is 11,200 years before present. So this is a few thousand years prior to Clovis. But they said they invested more time and money defending their dates and conducting new tests than they had ever imagined. And although they think the antiquity of the site has been established, the effort has been very stressful, meaning they were vigorously critiqued and attacked. And if they were to do it all over again, they might not dig so deep. So this was the point of archaeologists who wanted to deny us being here much earlier, was to create such a field of aggression that nobody would dig deeper. In fact, cultural resource management, when they go out to test sites all over Canada and the United States, oh, you don't dig deeper than 3 feet. You don't go below the glacier until nobody was here, right? So it's worked its way into federal policy on heritage. This is a site in South Carolina, right along the Georgia border. This is Alan Goodyear, and he has been excavating the Topper site for a number of years. The Topper site dates to over 50,000 years before present. So he wanted to dig deeper. He found the Clovis tool level, and that's where you're supposed to stop, but he wanted to dig deeper to study the soils and the pedology of the soils to see what the environment was like prior to Clovis arriving. What happens? He hit more tools, pre-Clovis tools. They date to 50,000 years. A PhD student from Texas studied the use wear on the tools and wrote a monster 900-page dissertation proving these tools that were made and used by humans. So this is definitely a very solid site. But he said that he knew he had crossed the line, challenging the orthodoxy of North American archaeology. He said it's a weird feeling to be putting a career of 30 years on the table, but there's no turning back. So he hasn't done this with great support. His university just turned down a major Netflix documentary that wanted to review the site and be part of a documentary, and they wouldn't let him. So there's numerous pre-Clovis sites dispersed throughout the Western Hemisphere that meet or exceed the required reasonable scientific criteria. I just found out that there are a lot of sites, and I've always known this. When you go out and you're going to build a bridge or a road, you have to first check for cultural resources. And so they send a cultural resource firm out there and they document everything, and then that report is filed away in the state or provincial office. Not necessarily published, right? Because for one thing, they don't want to offer all that out to people that might go out looting. But an archaeologist can go to those state and provincial offices and review those records. And I have just found out that in Arizona alone, just Arizona, one state, there are over 1,400 sites documented that predate 11,200 years before present. So if I now go to every state and every province and I pull all those records of sites that dated to older than 11,200 years, I have no doubt I would have over 50 or 60,000 sites. Uh-oh, we're stuck. Oh. So this is me here. I'm at the Lucena site. Typical archaeologists, they're having me pose for pictures all day, and I didn't realize at the end of the day my t-shirt's inside out. I don't take many field pictures, these are the best. So this is the Lucena site in southwest Nebraska. This here is a berm The government actually funded building this because this is a reservoir, and when they started excavating, the water was up here along the walls. So they put the berm to protect it. But this site was excavated over 11 years. There were different field schools every summer there. A lot of archaeologists worked on this site. The Lucena site has spirally fractured mammoth bone that was broken by humans. We know that humans are the only ones that can break those huge bones. Even a short-faced bear can't get their mouth around it and break it. These mammoth and mastodon bones are gigantic. This site dated to 22,000 years before present. So what I'm doing here is I'm standing on the berm down here. This area was not previously excavated, and any mammoth bone that's eroding out of the cliff, I'm collecting it. And this was my PhD, one of my field school sites. So this is the mammoth bone. You can see the nice, clean spiral break. And like I say, these bones are not just big, they're incredibly dense. And they can't be broken by an animal biting them, or even just stepping on them. You have to take a boulder and bash them to break them. So there's been this really, people get a lot of attention all around the world to documenting the evidence for humanly fractured bone. And it sounds like a little nerdy, boring field, but let me tell you, they take it so serious, and it's amazing because it's a really good science and a really good way of showing human activity. So every site that I looked at the site, and then I looked for other sites around it that might date to the same time frame. So number one here is the Lucena site, right along the Medicine Creek Reservoir, and all around it in southwest Nebraska, Colorado, and Kansas are other sites that date from 14,000 to 22,000 years that have spirally fractured mammoth bone, and some of them have stone tools. So we know we have a regional area. So we know that site number one, Lucena, is not a false site. We know it's a very good site, and that people were in this area at the time, 22,000 years ago. This was about 500 miles south of the most southern edge of the glacier, the last glacial maximum. This is a berm in Southern California, where they located, when they were digging for a short highway connector, they located what was originally called the Highway 54 Mastodon site. It's now called the Serena site. I forget how many miles it was, maybe 10 or 12, but there are 121 sites discovered in that short little connector area. These are some of the mammoth and mastodon bones. So this site dates to 130,000 years before present. So the archaeologists that worked on this site, they found that the two femur heads from the mastodon were placed together here. The ribs were stacked up here. The bones were placed only how a human could have placed them. So that was one hint. And this nice curve on that bone you see there, that curve, that's an impact point from a boulder that was used to break that bone open. Because people really like to eat that marrow, and this bone made great tools because it was very dense. So the museum and all the archaeologists, those are some of the boulders that were found at the site. They weren't natural to the site, they had to be carried there. They sat on this collection for over 10 years because they knew that they would be immediately and vigorously attacked if they published on this site. They waited till the dating technology got to a place for really old sites it could not be questioned. They published on this site in 2017. That they even got it published in Nature or Science was amazing. And the response was immediate and extremely violent. You know, they would call every name in the book. These guys are scientists. Steve Holman was the head archaeologist at Denver Museum of Nature and Science for quite some time. And the Museum of Man in San Diego has a very good reputation for the work that they do. But nonetheless, they were vigorously attacked. So number one is where the Lucena site is. And we see around it, there's actually 8 more sites that date between 40 to 200,000 years before present. In central Mexico, around the Valasico Reservoir, are 5 more sites that date from 40 to 200,000 years before present. Those sites were dated by the U.S. Geological Survey. They did not make a mistake on their dates. So here you have an area of Southern California, central Mexico, where we see a regional area of human population at 200,000 years before present. So I began my research journey asking questions regarding the paleo-environmental possibilities of Pleistocene migrations and the evidence for pre-Hovis sites in the Western Hemisphere. From what I have learned, I argue there is a vast body of evidence supports initial migrations to the Western Hemisphere much earlier than Clovis. Discourses on the histories of indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, historically framed in archaeological conjecture, are more a product of powerful ideologies based in a colonial past than they are of the known archaeological record. How much time do I have left?
Your question.
Okay, let me skip.
When I make the adjustments, it's okay.
Okay, when I went to grad school, I wasn't given one paper by an indigenous scholar to read. I think maybe one by a junior. But I started looking and questioning and finding a lot on my own. So of course I found Vine Deloria first, and then I found RIVAS, and then I found Linda Tamale Smith, and just hearing those strong voices just totally freed my mind and my heart. And I linked that to, what did Leonard Sampson tell me? What is this job I have to do? And I realized, oh, I just have to rewrite world history to include the Americans. I got this. So now I've done that. But then, there's costs for the uncritical acceptance of knowledge produced via biases used to filter those data, such as the Clovis first hypothesis of initial migrations. In the case of uncritical acceptance of the dates of initial migrations, it's not just the archaeologists who supported arguments for earlier sites who suffered from academic bashing and an overly critical gaze of their research. The greatest price has been paid by indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere who have long endured soul wounds and social and political disparities created in part through archaeological links to ancestral places and times. I created a word, I invented a word in 2012, pyroepistomology. So when you think about how we use pyrotechnologies to clean the land, when we burn the land, we allow space for the sunlight to come on and create new healthy growth. So what is pyroepistemology? It's a metaphorical term where we burn off all those dehumanizing Western-centered talks and all those false hypotheses of indigenous people. We burn them out of academia by teaching, by making space and teaching indigenous knowledge, by creating space for telling truths. So rewriting Western data and indigenous history is a praxis that weaves indigenous knowledge through literature and stories and pushes back on misinformation, discrimination, and racism, making the world a better place for all people. So what did I learn from my journey? I came to understand that political and social disparities, including high rates of suicide among indigenous populations, are intimately tied to historical, anthropological, and archaeological knowledge production of dehumanization and erasure. I walked past the immense loss justified through archaeological discussions denying the civility, intellect, humanity, and the heartbeat of indigenous nations. For many, if not all indigenous people, there's no separation between the past and present. All time and all history is crucial to their culture and well-being. Therefore, rupturing the connection between the past and the present, contemporary and ancestral people, and the people and the land, as American archaeology has done, has been a very violent and destructive historical event. And so it's really important, that time-worn phrase, to know where you're going, you gotta know where you are, you gotta know where you've been. Archaeology has embraced the where we have been. And my daughter, last thing I'll say, my daughter went to a young women's conference in Northern BC a few years back and said, each girl was to share one thing that brought hope. And they would take all of those thoughts back to their communities with them to bring hope. And she said this one girl's face just lit up. And she said, oh my God, there's this archaeologist down in the States who says we've been here for over 50,000 years. That really brings me a lot of hope. We'll get our land, our languages, our history, our culture. We'll get everything back. And my daughter said, tee-hee-hee, I didn't tell her it was my mom. It sounds really odd, but I'm the only archaeologist in the world that has ever created a database of Pleistocene age sites of the Americas and published on it. And I've had elders come and tell me that. I never thought of it till they came and told me. But they asked me to please be careful where I went, because until I could train other people, I was the only one and they really needed me. And so I really pay attention to that. And I'm grateful for when elders come and give me that input. So, yeah, I'm done.
So, Louis Leakey, a lot of purpose years were arguing for what it did. And they said he was crazy.
Yeah, he dated the Calico site in California, and it was dating between 40 and 200,000 years old. He was doing it with Bruce Simpson. So here you have Louis Leakey, the most famous paleontologist of early humans in the world, saying that people have been here 40 to 200,000 years, and they're saying, oh, he's just an old drunk who's cheating on his wife. He's crazy now. Yeah, he's the world's most eminent human paleoanthropologist. And this is how they were so bent on keeping us as recent Asians from Asia and not indigenous to these continents and not being here longer, that they would even say that about him. Right now I'm writing a book. I can't write fast enough to keep up to all the requests, but I'm writing a book to honor 60 of those archaeologists that published on pre-Clovis sites. And what I'm doing in that book is I'm showing, look at, here are their documents. Here's their BA, here's their master's, here's their PhD, here's their publications, here's their research, here's their training, here's their fieldwork. These guys were strong scientists, these men and women, and they deserve to be honored for the work they've done, because for the last 100 years they've been just absolutely violated. And even I can't get a job in a Department of Archaeology in the Americas, in the United States or Canada. I have another friend who published on a site in Mexico that was over 30,000 years old. He's put in 167 applications and can't get a job. So we're talking about earlier sites, and archaeologists are saying, oh yeah, we like Indians, we believe you, oh yes. But the truth is, I went to one interview this year here in Ontario at an archaeology department, and a woman screamed at me, literally banged the table and screamed at me. You need to change how you talk about archaeologists. Are you going to change how you talk about archaeologists if you work here? No, absolutely I'm not. And this is a woman who claims to be a friend of Indians. And so, so there's a lot of nice faces and nice talk, but in reality, the underlying theme in American archaeology is still to deny this. But I have done a huge survey last year. I have to work on publishing it. But it seems now that at least 70% of archaeologists do support belief that we have been here longer than 24,000 years. So I can talk all day, but I need to sit out.
We have another speaker coming, but again, at around 1:30, we'll have an open discussion. So hold on to your questions.